Go ahead and get started. I wanted to thank everyone for attending this webinar on how we can be smarter and more engaging with our emails. My name is Abby Jarvis, and I'm the part of the team over at QGive. I'm really excited about this presentation. I know a lot of you are too, even those of you who are a little sleepy after last night's game. Daniel is a great guy, and he has a lot of knowledge to share with us today. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. We are recording this webinar, and we will send you a copy after it is over. You will probably get that email either later this afternoon or tomorrow morning. There is a chat box to the left where you can ask us questions. We'll be monitoring those questions as the presentation goes on, and we will have an opportunity to answer some of them at a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. If you are on Twitter and want to follow along, you can use the hashtag QWebinar. I know I will be tweeting some high points of Daniel's presentation, and you can also follow Klaviyo and QGive if you want to keep up on what these two companies are doing. With us today is Daniel Etheridge. He leads the nonprofit growth team at Klaviyo. One of his passions is helping nonprofits understand and execute the best email practices that can help nonprofits raise more money online. They also have a lot of insight into how email can help you keep more donors and re-engage donors that have lapsed. He's here to share a little bit about how we can apply some of these best practices specifically to our year-end fundraising campaigns this year in a way that will set us up for success next year. He's going to have a ton of great information. I hope you are ready to learn. It's going to be great. And with that, I'll turn things over to Daniel.
Thanks, Abby. Really appreciate it. And first I want to just thank QGive for giving us the opportunity to talk today. We're really excited to kind of share some of the research we've done and the knowledge, some of the knowledge we've got about how to engage folks with email. So yeah, with that, as Abby said, my name is Daniel Etheridge, and I am responsible for new vertical growth at Klaviyo, and I lead the nonprofit team. I'm originally from Chicago, so it's been kind of a crazy 18 hours. But so I'm extra pumped up to talk about email today. So in my career, I've worked at a lot of different startups, and I've really been focused on digital marketing, and specifically how to engage people through email and paid advertising. And as Abby said, my passion is more than just kind of executing that strategy. It's really about how to drive really efficient results and create a lot of value through email. And so that's kind of what I'm going to talk about today. As Abby mentioned, I work at Klaviyo, and Klaviyo is a marketing automation platform. And we're really focused on helping people to send better, smarter, and more engaging email and communications in general. Not only do we kind of provide a platform that helps folks do that, but we also really invested in providing content and kind of best practices to guide people towards being able to send really engaging communication. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of why email is so important, but I hope everyone is already kind of familiar with why email is so critical. We're going to talk about this term smarter email, which is, I will admit, is a kind of a loaded term, but we're going to kind of define that. We'll talk a little bit about how to use your data, and then we're going to jump into two specific types of email series, a welcome series and a donor re-engagement email. Now, both of these types of series I think can be really helpful during the holiday season, but I also think, maybe even more importantly, that these types of things are really the building blocks for how to have a really engaging and strategic email strategy throughout the entire year. So, why are we talking about email? Well, first of all, there really isn't any other cheap, scalable marketing medium that can be as personal as email. So there's lots of ways that you can engage supporters and donors. There are things like direct mail, paid advertising online, but those are often really expensive, and it's very hard to communicate specific messaging to specific people. And so email is one of the only mediums that allows you to do that. Also, email has grown a lot in terms of how much revenue it's able to generate for nonprofits. So based on an M&R study in 2016 that surveyed about 105 nonprofits, they found that email revenue has grown 25% kind of year over year between 2014 and 2015. And not only is it growing, but it's becoming one of the major drivers of online fundraising revenue. So it's over a quarter of all the revenue that organizations are able to drive online. With that, though, it's not only turning into this kind of driver of revenue, but it's one of the most efficient drivers of revenue. So they found for every dollar that an organization spends on email, they're able to generate about $40 in total contribution. So the return on investment for your email strategy can be really, really high. And so that's one of the reasons why it's so important that we focus on how to send really smart email. So let's talk a little bit about what smarter email means. Since, as I mentioned before, I think this is a loaded term. It's kind of like a marketing term that we use. But when you dive deeper into what smarter email is, it's email that has a targeted message that drives an action. It's email that has the right message for the right person at the right time. And then it's email that's measured and optimized so that the next send is better than the last. So the idea is that you want to be sending really thoughtful email, and you want to have a strategy that's done with intention. And so there are three things that really go into this smarter email strategy. And the first one is having a clear objective. And so this seems, pretty obvious. Obviously, when you're planning out what you want to send, you have some idea of what you're trying to accomplish. But I'd like, when you're starting to think about what type of email you're sending and what you're trying to achieve, write down the objective for the email. You should have a specific goal for what every email is trying to accomplish, regardless of if it's a newsletter, a fundraising appeal. You should have a very specific objective in mind. The second component of smarter email is to have a very well thought out target audience and content that's specific for that group. And so, the idea here is that a lot of people will send email or a newsletter to their entire list, but that content isn't necessarily relevant for each person you're sending to. So let's take a look at a quick example. Let's say you're sending your newsletter out. You're going to talk about a couple programs that you're offering or that you're working on. But you're going to send that email out to your supporters that maybe live all around the country. Now, the people who live in Chicago may take part in different programs or events, or may be interested in your organization for a different reason than the people in, let's say, Portland, Oregon. And so, instead of sending one newsletter out to everybody, what you can do is start to segment your list based on specific criteria, about people. So whether it's region or it's state or it's specific interests that people have, just using basic targeting and segmentation can really help your open rates, and it can help to drive much more engaging and relevant content. And so unsubscribes are something that we hear people like to talk about a lot. And so just sending more relevant content, being intentional about how you target people, is a great way to reduce those unsubscribe rates. So the last component of smarter email is really measurement. And so I know that everybody is thinking about measurement. People are measuring how many opens they get, their click rate, how many emails they're sending overall. But I'll ask you to take it a step further and really think about having a conversion metric for every email you send. And so a conversion metric is related to the objective that we talked about earlier, and it's measuring what you're trying to achieve. So, for example, an easy example would be a fundraising email. The idea is you're trying to generate money, so measuring the amount of money raised from that email send would be a good example of a conversion metric. But I think another example would be if you're sending out a newsletter that has information about specific programs, how many people actually click through to the website, and how much time did they spend reading about the programs you have, and how many people signed up? those types of conversion metrics, I think, are a lot more meaningful when you're trying to measure the results of your email campaigns. And so an easy way to kind of keep all this organized is to just use a simple chart. This might be the ugliest chart or spreadsheet that you've seen, but I think it's quite useful. So the columns of the chart are just your emails, and the rows are all the different criteria about the email. And you can see the smarter email criteria is baked in there, but this allows you to kind of go back and look and see kind of what you've been sending, how things have worked, and it also allows you to have some transparency within your organization. So people around the organization kind of know what's going on, and you can be a little bit more, it's easier to kind of plan what you're doing. So before we kind of jump into how to use data and some of these specific use cases, I want to define two terms that we're going to use later on in this presentation. The first are flows. Flows are also known as drip campaigns or email automation, but the idea of a flow is that it's an email that's triggered by some action or some series of inaction. And so these are the types of emails that go out to one specific person when they've engaged with you in a specific way. The other type of email that we talk a lot about at Klaviyo that I want to define quickly is a campaign, and that's the same thing as a newsletter. So these are emails that go out to a specific target audience and have content that's specific for that group. I hear all the time people call these e-blasts, and I'll ask you, don't use e-blasts. That is, in my opinion, one of the worst terms, because the idea behind that is that you're sending email or sending a message or blasting it out to everybody, and that's not the objective of email. Email should be a tool that allows you to be personal with all of your supporters and donors, and so just saying the word e-blast kind of wipes that entire idea out of what you're trying to do. So now I want to spend a couple minutes talking about how you can use your data, because I think once we've walked through kind of these smarter email techniques, using the data can help you to actually accomplish that. So let's take a look at a really basic sample donor life cycle. This should look pretty familiar. And so, your supporters are engaging with you all the time. Every supporter is a new supporter at some point. People make their first contribution and then more contributions after that. They attend events, they register for events. And at some point, most supporters also become inactive. And so when we talk about how to use email to be engaging, you can use these actions or these events that occur as a way to send targeted email. But just as important as targeting content based on people taking these actions, it's just as important to target email to those who have become inactive. So platforms like QGive allow you to do that. So within QGive, you're able to capture contribution data, who's giving, how much they're giving, what restriction they've given to. You can capture people who have attended or have registered for events or who are attending events. And that data is great. It allows you to understand how your donors are engaging with you. But the next step is to kind of make that data actionable. How can you use that data to be targeted and message people in a very specific way? So there are two, I think, really important times in the supporter and donor life cycle that you can use data to engage folks. And the first one is when someone is a new supporter or a new donor. And so one of the best ways that you can engage people is by using a welcome series. And so what we found is somewhere around 64% of nonprofits use a welcome series. In my mind, that's not even close to enough. It should be much closer to 100%. Every nonprofit is generating new supporters, new donors, and using and sending really relevant messaging at the time that they join your organization is one of the best ways to get them engaged early on so that they become a lifetime engaged supporter. But what struck me even more about this graph is that a third of the people who are sending welcome series are only sending one email. And so the problem with that is that there's so much relevant and important content that you should be sending folks when they're new to your organization. And you can't fit that in one email. And if you are, or you're trying to, that email is way too long and the content is going to get lost. And so welcome series should be a 3+ email series. They should go out over a 1 to a 3 week period. And the objective of the welcome series should really be to engage those new supporters and new donors and onboard them to your organization. So a welcome series, as I mentioned, is a series of three or more emails, and it should go to new supporters or potential donors and new donors. But the content of those emails should be different depending on if it's a new supporter or a new donor. So the first type of email in a welcome series should be a thank you note. Obviously, for a new supporter, you're thanking them for becoming part of your community, joining your organization. For a new donor, the thank you note can be much more specific to the contribution that the donor just made. And in your thank you note or in this first email, it's not a great idea to make, to have some sort of a hard ask, but asking for very simple things, joining you on social media, liking you on Facebook, giving some other, easy ways to get involved is a great way to design the content of that first email. So here's an example of the first email in a welcome series. We like to show emails of our customers in these types of webinars, but I wanted to take a second to show this specific email. This is one of our welcome series templates that we provide to any nonprofit that's using the platform. And you can see that the messaging in this email is really very simple. There's not a lot of text. And the important things are the image that draws the reader in and then the mission statement, which sticks out. And so if we go back and think about our smarter email criteria that we talked about earlier, the objective of this email is very clear. It's to engage the supporter with the mission statement and to make a couple very easy asks. The content is very specific to a new donor. You're telling the new donor or new supporter about the organization. And then in terms of measurement, you're able to see how people are engaging with this email, how many people went and followed you on social media, or decided to register for an event or some other activity that the organization is taking part in. The second email in the welcome series is one of my favorites. I think it's one of the most interesting things that people can do, and the idea is to capture what motivates that supporter or that new donor. And so there's a number of ways to do this. You can send out a survey, or you can use technology within the email to help capture what people are most interested in. And so, why is it so important to collect interest in the second email in this series? Well, if the whole idea is to be more relevant down the road, asking people what motivates them or what's most interesting to them allows you to use that information to target content down the road. And so this is something you should do for every new supporter, every new donor. You know what sorts of things your organization is working about, so find out which of those things are most relevant to your supporters. So here's a great example of an email of one of our customers, and actually also a customer of QGIve, Friends of the Blue Hills. They're here in Massachusetts. And they've done a really nice job capturing what people are interested in, or what drives them to be part of their organization. So you can see, we look back at our smarter email criteria. The objective of this email is obviously to collect the motivation for why someone joined the organization. They give them their 3 most important program types that they have at their organization. The content is very, very specific to a new donor or a new supporter. And in terms of measurement, not only are they able to understand for each person what's most important, but they're also able to do some kind of informal polling of what's most important kind of at a macro level for their supporters. The final type of email in a welcome series should be a call to action. So we've been building up to the call to action throughout the welcome series. And so obviously this should be very different for a new supporter versus a new donor. One of the things I see a lot, I guess not as much from nonprofit kind of advocacy groups, but from political campaigns, they do this all the time, and matter of fact, I find it to be almost insulting, is that right after someone's given, they ask for more money. That is a great way to drive unsubscribes, and you're clearly not in touch with that specific donor. So for a new donor, this is a great time to ask for some sort of non-financial engagement. Signing up to be a volunteer, deciding to RSVP for a program, or to even send some emails or send some sort of friend-to-friend email to people they know to help broaden the network of your organization. For a new supporter or potential donor, this is the time where you want to make that first ask. You've kind of built up to this call to action. You know kind of what motivates them, and you can use that content programmatically in this email to engage that new supporter and to make a clear argument for why it's important that they give. So here's another example from Friends of the Blue Hills out of their Welcome series. So this is a non-financial call to action email, but you can see they've used the information that they collected in that first email. I'll go back real quick and show you. So there were three types of motivators that you could select in this email. And depending on what you chose, you get a different email based on what your interest was. And so this is if you selected on trail maintenance, you get the trail maintenance email. And you can see that the content is very, very specific to that person's interest. So this is obviously going to be very relevant to that person. And so when we think back about our smarter email criteria, the goal here is to get people to both find out more about the specific opportunities to get involved, but then to sign up on the website. So you're tracking both things. The content very specific to folks who selected trail maintenance as their most important issue. And then in terms of measurements, they're able to see how long someone spent learning about the program and the number of people that actually signed up to take part. So that's an overview of a welcome series. You can obviously add more emails to this series, but these three types of emails I think are really important, and they're all driving to that final email that you're trying to drive people to some sort of action. And when you can drive that action, that's how you're able to get people to be longer term engaged supporters. So the second type of email series I want to talk about today that I think is really important to use not only during the holiday season but throughout the year is a donor re-engagement email. So it was really obvious that new supporters are a group of people that you need to spend some time to engage. It's the same thing for folks who once were engaged, made a contribution, showed that they care about your organization, but have kind of fallen off and have not been engaged recently. So here's kind of a basic use case. One of the reasons I think this is so important. So we've found that for most nonprofits that we work with, somewhere between 65 and 90% of their donors have not made a contribution in the last 180 days. That may be because folks only give once a year, but either way, they've gone a long time without making that contribution. So let's say you have a donor base of somewhere around 10,000 people. That means around 7,000 of those people haven't made a contribution in the last 180 days. If on average your donation size is about $150 per donor, then that means that sitting out there's over $1 million of potential revenue that you could be generating if you're able to re-engage folks. Now, I'm not going to suggest that you're able to capture that entire $1 million, but if you're able to capture just a small percentage, let's say 5%, maybe even once a year of those kind of disengaged donors, that's an extra $50,000 of revenue that you can raise, that'll go right to helping you impact the cause you're working on. So there's a huge potential out there to re-engage past donors and drive a lot of revenue that you're otherwise not able to tap into. So how does this work? Well, someone makes a contribution. Immediately you're sending a new donor thank you note or a repeat donor thank you note, depending on if it's a new donor or a repeat donor. 180 days goes by, and you're able to send out this first donor re-engagement email. Now, the content of this first email should reference that first contribution, and you should talk about why it's important that that person give again. Talk about what you've accomplished over the last 180 days with that contribution, and that will show kind of how productive your organization has been with the money you've raised, and make a really strong use case for why another donation is so important. And so in that email, you should have a clear call to action to give again, but also maybe an impact story talking about why that first contribution was so important. So if no contribution is made in that first email, 5 days later, you can follow up again. And the content of this email can talk specifically about how that next contribution is going to help your organization going forward. What is that next $150 going to allow you to do to have the impact that's so important to both the donor and your organization? If no contribution is made in that email, 180 days later, you're going to send an anniversary email that thanks the donor again for that first contribution. And then in this email, the content can talk about what the organization isn't able to do without donors like the one that's receiving this email. Why is it so important that people give? What can't you accomplish if you're not able to raise that money? And so, there's 3 very different messages that all relate back to that first contribution. So if someone makes a contribution while this series is going on, the clock resets for them. They get taken out of the current flow. And then 180 days later, they get that first donor re-engagement email again. So this series is kind of a safety net for you. Once you turn it on, people start to flow into this series of emails. You can update the content, 2, maybe 3 times a year if you want to. People can't receive the email more than once every 180 days, so you don't have to worry about people getting the same content more than once if you update it twice a year. So this is a safety net. So you can focus on your campaign appeals. You can focus on the emails you're sending out about specific programs, about engaging specific supporters, about the things they're interested in, and let this series kind of take care of making sure that no one ever goes too long without getting a fundraising email that's very specific to who they are as a donor. So here's one of my favorite examples of a re-engagement email. This is Liberty in North Korea. They're a customer of ours, and they design wonderful emails. They're all very straightforward. The content is very, very clear. The call to actions are very obvious. And so when we think back about our smarter email criteria, the content in this email is very specific to folks who have given in the past. That they're very clear impact story. The goal is obvious, to generate that second contribution. And in terms of measurement, they're able to see or able to measure how much money they're raising from this specific email. But they're also able to see how this email increases their kind of overall donor lifetime value, which is a really important thing to be measuring. Another great example of a donor re-engagement email is this one from Outside the Bowl that went out a few months ago. And one of the things I love about this email is how they've used dynamic content. So we've blurred out the name that the email went to, but you can see it references the person who gave multiple times, and it even references the contribution amount that they gave. And so, this email is for that specific person. It has a great impact story, but it's really relevant and personal to the person that's receiving it. So kind of how does this all fit together? Well, as I mentioned before, these 2 series of emails, they're safety nets for you. They're very, very important because they engage people at 2 really important times in the donor life cycle. But it's something that you can set up once, modify every so often, and not have to focus on your engagement with new donors and supporters and folks who have gone a period of time without re-engaging or making that next contribution. So that allows you to focus a lot more on all the other great things you're doing, both within email and within your other kind of marketing, strategy, but still taking care of those donors and supporters at a really important time. So hopefully from this presentation, you'll take away how important it is to really be intentional about what you're sending people. Every email needs to have that very clear objective. You want to make sure you have that very specific target audience and that there's content that's relevant for each of those target audiences. If you're sending out an email to people in different regions or people with different interests, you don't need completely different emails for everybody. It could just be one or two sentences that are different that just make that email so much more engaging, or an image that just is much more relevant to a person who's interested in a certain program. And then finally, it's really, really important to be measuring these results, not only so that you can measure whether or not you're meeting your objective, but every email you send can be better than the last if you're measuring how well all of your emails are working. So, using A/B testing, looking at subject lines every time you send, measuring all of those results will allow you to become a better and better marketer with every send. So some next steps. So, we mentioned platforms like QGIve, which allow you to capture all this great data. That data is really important, but what's even more important is that you're able to use that data in an actionable way. You're able to actually go segment people, target people, provide dynamic content to people based on all that data. And you should be using technology that makes that easier. I know a lot of people are using spreadsheets, they're uploading lists, they're even writing specific one-time emails to each individual donor to try and be more relevant. There's technology out there that allows you to use that data in kind of a streamlined way to engage people in a more scalable and personal way. And so you should use technology like that. Klaviyo is one of those technologies that allows you to do that. And that's one of the reasons that we focus so much on being able to use platforms like QGIve to be so much more relevant. And so as I've mentioned a bunch of times, but I want to hammer it home again, when you use technology like this, when you're able to use your data, you can focus a lot more on making sure that each message is relevant to each person. And when you think about how folks have been talking with donors and supporters at nonprofits, it's so important that you're relevant. That's why you call your donors and thank them for contributions. It's why you spend time writing personalized thank you notes. There's technology that lets you do that so that you can focus on that messaging instead of spending all of that kind of manual, those hours with all that kind of manual labor. And so kind of how does Klaviyo do that? Well, we build integrations with lots of different donation platforms. We have a great integration with QGIve. It literally takes 5 minutes to connect the two platforms. You don't need any sort of technical know-how. You plug in basically a username and password into Klaviyo, and that connects the two platforms. It'll sync your existing data and pull in real-time data for you so that you can use that data to build very easy segments that update in real time and then go out and send targeted email messaging to those segments. When you integrate with Klaviyo, we pre-build a number of best practice automation emails. Both of the series we talked about today, the Welcome series and the Donor Reengagement series, are pre-built for you. All you got to do is swap out some images and some content and turn them on, and they'll be that safety net that allows you to then focus on other pieces of the donor lifecycle. We also provide a bunch of best practice templates specifically for nonprofits. I know that's something that folks spend a lot of time on. We want to make it so that you can spend more time on thinking about your strategy and your content and less about building emails and making sure everything looks perfect. That's something that we can help you do. And then finally, email revenue tracking and reporting is really important to us. We started out working with lots of e-commerce businesses, and so from the very, very beginning, return on investment has been our focus, and that's no different from nonprofits. Nonprofits should be focused a lot on making sure that everything they do has a return. That return is different for different sorts of marketing activity, but for things like online advertising and email, it's easy to measure and it's easy to let that data kind of guide you, and so that's a very important component to the Klaviyo platform. So with that, I'd love to take questions. If you have any questions you want to ask me personally, feel free to reach out to me. at daniel.essrig@klaviyo.com. If you'd like to request a demo, we'd love to show you the platform and talk more about how you can implement this strategy. Feel free to go to integrations.klaviyo.com/qgib and sign up, and we'll get in touch with you as soon as we can. And one of the things I do want to mention real quick is that a lot of people will say, oh man, I know that I need to change, I need to move to a platform that allows me to do more, but I don't have that time to invest. Well, one of the things that we've done is the way we've built these integrations allows you to transition your email from things like MailChimp, Constant Contact, over to Klaviyo within minutes. Those integrations, the moving the data, is pre-built. And so we have folks all the time that say, okay, I'm going to make the commitment to start sending smarter email that's more engaging, and I'm going to move to a platform like Klaviyo, and I'm going to do it in a matter of a day. I'm going to move everything over, connect my data, and get going. And that's totally reasonable. We see people do that all the time, and we're happy to help folks through that transition process. If you want more information on some of the statistics that I talked to today, this M&R benchmarking report that was done is absolutely terrific. It talks about all different types of nonprofits, how they use email, how they use digital marketing. It's one of the best reports that I've ever seen in terms of how people use email and digital marketing, so I'd strongly recommend taking a look at that. We have great nonprofit pricing, so don't be scared away by the pricing on the website. We work with lots of nonprofits and price for them specifically. So Abby, with that, I'd love to take questions. Thanks again, everybody, for attending the webinar today, and I look forward to hopefully talking with many of you in the future.
Awesome. We do have some really great questions from some of the people in the audience that I think have a lot of value. One of the first ones that is especially interesting is from John Page. He asked, is email passé? Isn't everything on Facebook and Twitter now?
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of things on Facebook and Twitter. Facebook is a great way to engage people. But I think that email can be very personal too, and it can be, when you reach out to people on Facebook, you definitely are able to send relevant messaging based on people's interests, who they are, how they've engaged with you in the past. But I think email allows you to be more personal in the way that you talk to each specific donor. It can be much more automated, so that you can send a series of messaging that is sequential and relevant based on the way someone has engaged with you. So whether it's someone making that contribution, sending a series of thank you notes, whether someone is a small donor who hasn't been engaged recently, and then you can reach out with a very personal message that's specific to small donors. I think email allows you to do that even more. One of the actually really cool products that we offer in Klaviyo is that any of the segments that you build, you can send those segments programmatically to Facebook and use those segments to advertise specifically to the people who meet the criteria of the segment. So for example, those segments of folks who haven't given over the last 180 days, not only can you email them within Klaviyo, but you can also target those people on Facebook using the integration we have with Facebook advertising and their audience segmentation.
Awesome. The next question we have is from Ying Lee. They ask, what is the time frame for a welcome series? Should it be done in the first month or the first few months to be most effective, or should it be done right away?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the things that I think is really important to keep in mind is that the suggestions on timing are kind of they're kind of an overview for the entire kind of market of nonprofits we work with. And so depending on your organization and how you engage people, these welcome series timings should be a little different. So I'll give you an example. We work with a lot of organizations that use a lot of peer-to-peer fundraising. And so the welcome series for someone who creates a fundraising page or is a new peer-to-peer fundraiser has a very different timing than someone who is a new supporter or a new donor. A new supporter or a new donor, I think a 2 to 3 week welcome series with somewhere between 3 to 5 emails is kind of a good ballpark for how you should be engaging new supporters. Whereas a welcome series for an organization that is using, is heavy on peer-to-peer fundraising, you can send, a thanks for getting started email and then a series of fundraising tips every day for 2 weeks. So the timing on those two types of welcome series can be very different. But one of the things I'll say about this, and I get asked a lot, how many emails should I be sending, in general? Maybe like, should I be sending once a week? Should I be sending once a day? And what I tell people is, I get really engaging emails from organizations that send every day. But because the content is so great, I read those emails every day, and so I don't feel like I'm being spammed. Now, I get emails from other organizations that send email once a month, but the content of that messaging of their emails is not relevant, and that I feel like is spam. So it's much, much more about the content you're sending people. You can send short, to-the-point emails, pretty often without people feeling like you're bombarding their inbox.
That actually ties in really well with another question we have from Miriam Gandel, who asked, what is a good way to word a subject line so that email isn't perceived as spam?
That's a great question. So we've actually done a fair amount of writing about this on our blog, and we've written about it both for nonprofits and for-profit organizations. But the best practices are pretty much the same. You don't want to be using a bunch of capital letters. You don't want to be using a lot of special characters. You want your subject lines to be honest, to represent the content that's in the email. But also, you should be creative. I mean, using subject lines that grab people's attention is great, and there's no reason not to be creative. One of the things that I'll recommend is that every email you send, especially newsletters, you should test your subject lines. It should be really, really, really easy to A/B test your subject lines, and once you can determine which subject line is working the best, then you can then automatically send the rest of the emails for that series to that winning subject line. And so that lets you test 3 or 4 subject lines every send, and that'll give you a much better idea which subject lines are most relevant to your specific support or subset, because what works for one organization might be very different from what works for another organization.
Perfect. That kind of leads into the topic about the donor re-engagement emails. Joan Yost noted that there are a lot of different resources out there that say that donors don't want a lot of metrics in their emails. She's in human services, and she said, do we really say we helped 18 people get into new housing, or we did safety planning for 65 new clients? Does that come off as a little too cold, or is that something that you've seen really work with re-engaging donors?
That's a great question. I think it can go both ways. So if we go back, actually, I'll pull up this, I assume you can still see the slide. This email from Liberty in North Korea, the content of these donor re-engagement emails that they send, and they send a series of, I think it's 3 or 4 emails over a period of a year, very similar actually to the one we talked about today. They tell these wonderful impact stories. And so, they're not necessarily talking about how many people they're able to help. They're talking about one specific person that people can relate to that really drives home, what their organization is working towards. And so I would agree that, sending, kind of like an infographic style email that references a bunch of different statistics can be cold and not that relevant. Really, one of the things that nonprofits have, a big opportunity for them is they generally have great stories because you're working on great causes. It's one of the reasons I love working with not-for-profit and kind of social enterprise organizations is because you're not just trying to sell something. You're actually helping, people or causes, and so you should use those stories, to convince people that the work you're doing is so important, and really drive home, how your organization is able to impact that cause. So one other thing I'll say about that is, one thing I noticed that I really don't like, and I think that can turn people off, is talking about the organization. So saying, we did this. It's not about what you did. It's not, the people aren't giving to your organization because of what you're doing. They're giving because of the impact you're making. And so when you talk about, when you write about these impact stories, talk much more about the actual impact versus kind of what you did or how you did it, because people really care about how the money they gave actually impacted that person. And so that's another kind of best practice that nonprofits can use to be more engaging in these donor re-engagement emails.
Perfect. I know a lot of this storytelling is becoming the center of a lot of nonprofits world right now, especially as we enter the holiday season. And one of the events in the holiday season is Giving Tuesday. And Dr. Jennifer Erskine-Ogden asked what the timeline around Giving Tuesday should be for the 3 email series.
So that's a good question too. So one of the things that's really important about these email series is that you don't want them to interfere with the other things you're doing. And so one of the tools that we've got in Klaviyo that's kind of built in is the smart sending tool, where you can set a time period where you don't want people to receive multiple emails. And so during the Giving Tuesday season, if you're sending out a lot of other emails, what we recommend is that you either pause or turn off some of these donor re-engagement emails, because you're going to be reaching out to all these specific people with the Giving Tuesday message. And so that's one of the times where I think it's okay to take a step back from some of these automated series. Because on Giving Tuesday specifically, it's much more important that the Giving Tuesday message go out than the donor re-engagement email. For a regular fundraising appeal, I may feel differently, but Giving Tuesday is such an important and critical event as kind of the kickoff to the end of the year that I really think that content should take precedent over the donor re-engagement email. Now, for the welcome series, it might be a little bit different. Someone joins the organization. I'm not sure you're better off sending a bunch of fundraising email out of the gate. I think it's more important to get them onboarded. You're always going to have that opportunity to ask them to contribute, 5, 6, 7 days down the road as your welcome series goes out. So for donor re-engagement, I would turn that off during the Giving Tuesday time period. And the welcome series, that email series, I think should take precedent.
Awesome. We do have one question from Colleen Reardon. She asked, if you haven't been emailing your list but you have built one, how should you ease your current supporters into receiving regular emails?
Yeah, I think that's something that I think is a challenge. One of the ways that we tackle that, or we help people tackle that, is first I like to look and see kind of the email that you have sent, if you've sent anything. What do your opens and clicks look like? Who has been most engaged? And if you don't have that information, look and see outside of email who's been most engaged. Who's attended events recently? Who's personally been engaged? And start with that group. Start sending email to them, and depending on how it goes, then expand broader and broader and broader to your entire list. So. Also, it kind of depends on how big your list size is. If you're talking about, let's say, a couple hundred or a couple thousand people, sending an email to all those people, to get people re-engaged is okay, especially if you're asking people what they're most interested in. I think that's a very reasonable thing to do as a first step to re-engage your list if you haven't sent in a while. If you have a list that's bigger, 25, 50,000 people, then I think it helps to work with someone to look at your list and see how people have engaged with you in the past, and start with a smaller group and kind of work your way out so that you're not just sending one kind of bland email to everybody at one time, because that could potentially hurt you down the road in terms of your kind of overall email deliverability and email engagement, because there may be a big group of those people that their email addresses just aren't good anymore, and you don't want to be sending a one-off email to those types of people.
Sure. Well, I have one last question. We've established how important it is to have donor re-engagement series and to have welcome series for new donors or potential donors. What are some other flows that you think nonprofits should think about having set up for their donors?
Oh yeah, that's great. There are a lot of different series. We're working with an organization who's just moved over, and they literally moved 65 different flows over to Klaviyo, and we've spent a bunch of time talking about it, what the objective of each flow is and how it's personally engaging each person. But I would say some of the most common flows outside of the welcome series and the donor re-engagement series, I think thank you notes are really important because the content in those emails should be very specific to the person who just gave. So a new donor should be getting very different content than a repeat donor, and that content should be very different from a reoccurring donor, automatic reoccurring donor. And so I think a thank you note is an easy win for nonprofits in terms of setting up dynamic content. I think another great series of emails are for peer-to-peer fundraisers, and so I think it's often a challenge for how you communicate with both people who are contributing to peer-to-peer fundraising pages, but also how do you guide people who are setting up peer-to-peer fundraising pages who may not have any experience raising money. Guiding those people through a series of emails that not only gives them some best practices, gives them some tips on how to make their fundraising pages more engaging, how to reach out to their network to raise money, then a series of emails that goes out when they've actually reached that first milestone to congratulate them, to push them towards that next milestone. I think that's honestly one of the series that we found that people are most excited about because that's, I think, been a major challenge for people is, how do I really engage both my fundraisers and their networks that are now, have become a part of the organization, not necessarily because they cared that much about the organization, but they cared about that fundraiser. And so I think there's some ways that you can use email flows to really engage both of those groups.
That's awesome. Thank you. You guys have heard Daniel talk a lot about the integration between QGIve and Klaviyo. If you're interested in learning about that and how it works, give us a call. And if you'd like to learn about some of the fundraising tools that Daniel mentioned, like peer-to-peer fundraising and dynamic content for emails, or even if you just like to learn some of the other tools and features that QGIve has in our fundraising platform, please give us a call or visit us online. You can tweet at me. You can send us emails, however you want to get a hold of us. We would love to talk to you and how we can help your nonprofit raise more money and work with people like Daniel to make the rest of your life easier. That is the presentation that we've had for you today. You guys have been awesome. We got tons of questions. If you have questions after this webinar, like Daniel said, please feel free to email us. We love talking about this kind of stuff, and we love seeing nonprofits succeed. So we're ready to talk. Just to close up, keep an eye on your email. Y'all will get an email from us either later this afternoon or sometime tomorrow with a link to the recording of this webinar. That email will also include an invite to our next webinar. John Lepp and Jen Love of the Agents of Good are going to be talking with us about the idea of donor love and how loving your donors can have a huge effect on your fundraising. We're super excited about that webinar, just as we were excited about this one, and we hope that you're able to tune into that one as well. At that, I will close things up. Y'all, please get a hold of us if you have any questions, and if you don't, I hope you have a great afternoon, and I hope you have a really great year in fundraising season.